The roar of laughter cut through the small church like a knife, silencing the chirping birds outside and turning Sophia Calloway's wedding day into the most humiliating moment of her 22 years. Tears burned her eyes as she stood frozen at the altar, abandoned by the man who had promised to make her his wife, while the townsfolk of Whispering Creek snickered and whispered behind raised hands. It was 1878 in the Montana Territory, and Sophia had just become the town's newest cautionary tale. Her fiancé, Thomas Whitaker, had not only failed to appear for their wedding, but had sent his younger brother with a hastily scribbled note that the boy had read aloud to the entire congregation. "Found someone better. Sorry for the trouble." "Always knew she wasn't good enough for a Whitaker," someone whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Plain as a fence post," another added, "and about as charming." Sophia stood rigid in her mother's altered wedding dress, the lace collar suddenly feeling like it was choking her. The dress had traveled west in her mother's trunk 20 years ago, a remnant of a more genteel life back east before consumption had claimed both her parents, leaving Sophia alone to manage their small homestead. "Perhaps she should have spent more time learning to cook instead of having her nose in those books," Mrs. Perkins, the banker's wife, remarked with artificial sympathy. "Men need a useful wife, not a dreamer." Sophia had spent months preparing for this day, not just the dress alterations or the modest decorations that now adorned the church, but building up the courage to believe that someone might want her. Thomas had seemed so sincere in his courtship, bringing her wildflowers and listening to her talk about the stories she loved, or at least she thought he had been listening. Reverend Wilson cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Perhaps we should all, I reckon we ought to be ashamed of ourselves." The deep voice cut through the murmurs, and every head turned toward the back of the church. Sophia blinked away tears to see who had spoken. Dawson Ryker stood in the doorway, his tall frame silhouetted by the bright spring sunlight. He removed his hat as he stepped into the church, revealing dark hair that curled slightly at the edges. His face was tanned from working outdoors, with a strong jaw shadowed by a day's worth of stubble. Dawson wasn't a frequent visitor to town, preferring the solitude of his ranch several miles outside Whispering Creek. When he did come to town, people tended to notice. He was one of the most successful cattle ranchers in the territory, though he rarely flaunted his wealth. "A woman stood up with courage and hope today," he continued, his boots echoing on the wooden floor as he walked down the aisle, "and all you fine folks can do is mock her pain. That ain't the Christian charity I heard preached from this very pulpit." The church fell silent as Dawson approached the altar. Sophia couldn't move, couldn't breathe. She'd exchanged perhaps 10 words with the man in all her years in Whispering Creek. "Why was he defending her, Miss Calloway?" he said, his voice softer now. "May I?" Before she could respond, Dawson took her trembling hand in his, bent slightly at the waist, and pressed his lips to her knuckles in a gesture so gallant and unexpected that a collective gasp rippled through the church. "Any man would be fortunate to have a woman of your character and courage as his wife," he said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Thomas Whitaker has proven himself a fool today, and you're better off without him." Sophia's heart hammered in her chest. She was acutely aware of every pair of eyes on them, of the warm pressure of Dawson's calloused hand holding hers, of the unexpected tenderness in his blue eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Ryker," she managed to whisper, finding her voice at last. "Would you allow me to escort you home?" He asked, offering his arm. With as much dignity as she could muster, Sophia placed her hand on his arm. "Yes, thank you." Together they walked down the aisle, past the stunned faces of the townsfolk who had been laughing at her just moments before. No one dared say a word as they passed. Outside, Dawson's wagon waited. He helped her up onto the seat with the same care he might show a lady at a fine Boston social, then climbed up beside her and took the reins. "Why?" Sophia asked as they pulled away from the church, unable to contain the question any longer. Dawson glanced at her, his expression serious. "No one deserves to be humiliated like that, Miss Calloway, especially not someone who's never done harm to anyone in this town. You hardly know me." "I know enough," he replied simply. I know you help Mrs. Finley with her children since her husband died in that mining accident. I know you donate books to the schoolhouse even though you can barely afford them yourself. And I know Thomas Whitaker isn't worthy to shine your boots." Sophia stared at him in surprise. How did he know these things about her? The wagon rumbled along the dirt road leading to her small homestead on the edge of town. Sophia held tight to the seat, still feeling like she might shatter at any moment. "I appreciate your kindness, Mr. Ryker, but you didn't need to do that," she finally said. "You've probably just made yourself the subject of town gossip for weeks to come." A small smile tugged at his lips. "Miss Calloway, I've been the subject of town gossip since I arrived here 5 years ago. One more story won't hurt me none." When they reached her homestead, a modest cabin with a small barn and chicken coop, Dawson helped her down from the wagon. Sophia stood awkwardly, still in her wedding dress, unsure what to say. "Would you care for some tea?" she offered, the social conventions her mother had taught her taking over. "It's the least I can do after your kindness." Dawson hesitated, then nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." Inside the cabin, Sophia busied herself with the stove and tea kettle, grateful for something to do with her hands. The cabin was small but neat, with handmade curtains at the windows and a bookshelf overflowing with well-loved volumes. "You have quite a collection," Dawson remarked, examining her books while she prepared the tea. "Books were my mother's passion. She brought as many as she could when my parents came west." Sophia set 2 cups on the table. "She taught me to read before I could walk, according to my father." Dawson sat at the table, looking unexpectedly at ease in her small home. "What happened to them? Your parents' consumption?" "Father first, then mother 6 months later." Sophia poured the tea and sat across from him. "That was 4 years ago, and you've been managing this place on your own since then," she nodded. "It's not much, but it's home. It's impressive," he said sincerely. "Not many women could do what you've done." Sophia stared into her tea cup. "Impressive enough for friendship, perhaps, but not for marriage, apparently." "Thomas Whitaker is a fool," Dawson repeated firmly. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping their tea. Sophia studied him covertly. He was handsome in a rugged way, with lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he smiled more than she'd realized. "Why did you really come to the church today, Mr. Ryker?" she asked suddenly. "You're not exactly known for attending services." Dawson set down his cup. "I came to town for supplies, heard about the wedding, and—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've seen how Thomas treats his horses, figured any woman deserved better than a man who'd break a spirit just because he could." There was something in his eyes, something he wasn't saying, but Sophia didn't press. He had rescued her from humiliation. She owed him some privacy in return. "Well, whatever your reasons, I'm grateful." She managed a small smile. "Though I suspect I'll be the talk of Whispering Creek for months to come." "Let them talk," Dawson said firmly. "You've done nothing to be ashamed of." When he left an hour later, Sophia stood in her doorway watching his wagon disappear down the road, a strange feeling in her chest. The day had begun with a dream of marriage and ended with abandonment and humiliation, and yet, somehow, she felt as though something important had happened. Something unexpected. She had no idea that Dawson Ryker had been watching her from afar for nearly 2 years, or that his impulsive act of chivalry would change both their lives forever. The following days were difficult for Sophia. Though she tried to hold her head high when she went into town for supplies, she couldn't miss the whispers that followed her. Some were sympathetic, others unkind, but all reminded her of her public humiliation. There she is, poor thing. Can you imagine being left at the altar like that? At least Dawson Ryker showed her some kindness. That last comment was often followed by speculative looks that made Sophia's cheeks burn. The town seemed determined to create a romance where there was none. One act of kindness, however gallant, didn't mean anything beyond simple decency. A week after the wedding that wasn't, Sophia was working in her small vegetable garden when the sound of hoofbeats made her look up. Dawson Ryker approached on horseback, leading a second horse behind him. "Mr. Ryker," she said, standing and brushing dirt from her hands, "this is unexpected." He dismounted with easy grace. Miss Calloway, I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. She gestured to the garden, just trying to coax some vegetables from this stubborn soil. It looks like you're doing a fine job. He glanced at her neat rows of plantings. I was wondering if you might be interested in a ride. It's a beautiful day and… He patted the second horse, a gentle-looking mare with a white blaze on her face. Daisy here could use some exercise. Sophia hesitated. That's very kind, but I have work to do. The work will still be here in a few hours, he said with a slight smile. And I thought you might appreciate a chance to get away from town and all the gossip for a while. He was right, of course. The idea of escaping the confines of her small homestead and the suffocating atmosphere of town was tempting. And if she was honest with herself, she was curious about Dawson Ryker. Let me change into something more suitable, she said, making her decision. 20 minutes later, they were riding away from her homestead, heading toward the foothills that rose in the distance. Sophia had to admit that it felt wonderful to be on horseback again. She'd sold her father's horse 2 years ago when money had grown too tight. You ride well, Dawson observed as she easily kept pace with him. My father taught me. He said every Western woman should know how to handle a horse. She patted the mare's neck. She's lovely. Is she yours? She is now. I bought her from a family heading back east. They couldn't take her on the train, and they wanted someone who'd treat her well. His expression darkened slightly. Too many folks out here see horses as tools, not living creatures deserving of care. There was that hint of something deeper again, the same tone she'd heard when he mentioned Thomas's treatment of horses. Sophia wondered what lay behind it. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing steadily into the hills until Dawson led them to a small meadow beside a clear stream. Wild lupines colored the grass with splashes of purple and blue, and the view of the valley below was breathtaking. It's beautiful here, Sophia said as they dismounted. Dawson tied the horses where they could drink from the stream and graze on the lush grass. It's one of my favorite spots. Not many people come up this way. He spread a blanket on the grass and produced a small bundle from his saddlebag. I thought you might be hungry. The bundle contained fresh bread, cheese, and dried apple slices, simple fare, but it tasted wonderful in the open air with the scent of pine and wildflowers around them. Tell me about your ranch, Sophia said as they ate. I've heard it's quite successful. Dawson nodded. It's doing well enough. Started with just 20 head of cattle and a run-down cabin. Now I've got nearly 200 head and a proper house. There was quiet pride in his voice. Took a lot of work, but it was worth it. You did this all on your own, had a partner at first, my cousin Samuel. But he took ill with fever 2 years in. After he passed, it was just me. He looked out over the valley. Hired help comes and goes, but finding good men willing to stay is hard. It sounds lonely, Sophia said softly. Dawson turned to her, his blue eyes intent. It can be. But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I chose the former, until recently at least. The way he looked at her made Sophia's heart beat faster. She glanced away, unsure how to respond. What about you? He asked. You must get lonely too, out on that homestead by yourself. Sometimes, she admitted, but I have my books and the chickens are surprisingly good company. She smiled, trying to lighten the mood. Books are fine companions, Dawson agreed, but they can't keep you warm at night or help with the heavy lifting. Sophia felt her cheeks grow warm. Mr. Ryker, Dawson, he interrupted. Please call me Dawson, Dawson, she repeated, finding she liked the feel of his name. I appreciate your concern, but I've managed well enough on my own. You have, he agreed readily, better than most would. Doesn't mean you should have to face everything alone, though. They fell silent, watching clouds cast shadows that raced across the valley below. It was peaceful in a way Sophia hadn't experienced in a long time. May I ask you something personal? She ventured after a while. You may ask. I might not answer. Why did you really help me that day at the church? The truth, please. Dawson was quiet for so long that Sophia thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I've watched you for a while now, Sophia. Not in any improper way, he added quickly. But I've noticed how you carry yourself with dignity despite the hardships you've faced. How you're kind even to those who don't deserve it. How you work that homestead with more determination than men twice your size." He turned to face her fully. "When I heard you were marrying Thomas Whitaker, it didn't sit right with me. I knew what kind of man he was: selfish, mean-spirited when no one important was looking. But it wasn't my place to interfere." "Then why did you?" "When I got to town that morning and heard what had happened." His jaw tightened. "The way people were laughing, treating your pain like entertainment, I couldn't stand by and watch. No one deserves that kind of cruelty, especially not someone like you." The sincerity in his voice touched Sophia deeply. "Thank you for your honesty." "There's something else you should know," he added. "I've been meaning to call on you properly for nearly a year now, never quite found the courage." Sophia stared at him in disbelief. "You, lacking courage?" A rueful smile crossed his face. "Facing down rustlers is one thing. Facing rejection from a woman you admire is another matter entirely." "You admire me?" The concept seemed impossible to grasp, very much so. His gaze was steady and unwavering. "And now that Thomas Whitaker has proven himself the fool I always thought him to be, I'd like to court you properly." "If you're willing." Sophia looked away, her thoughts in turmoil. "I just experienced a very public rejection, Dawson. I'm not sure my heart or my pride could survive another." "I understand that," he said quietly, "and I'll respect whatever decision you make. Just know that my intentions are sincere, and I'm willing to prove that for as long as it takes." The ride back to her homestead was quieter, both of them lost in their thoughts. When they arrived, Dawson helped her down from the mare, his hands strong and sure at her waist. "Thank you for today," Sophia said. "It was exactly what I needed." "I'm glad." He hesitated. "Would it be all right if I called on you again, perhaps Sunday after church?" Sophia considered his request. She was still raw from Thomas's rejection, still uncertain about risking her heart again. But something about Dawson's steady presence and honest words gave her courage. "Yes," she said finally, "I'd like that." His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "Until Sunday, then." As promised, Dawson appeared at her door on Sunday afternoon, freshly shaven and wearing a clean shirt. He brought a small bouquet of wildflowers and a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy. That visit became the first of many over the following weeks. Sometimes they rode into the hills. Other times they simply sat on her porch talking as the sun set. Dawson helped her mend the chicken coop that had been leaning dangerously to one side, and Sophia taught him to make her mother's apple pie when he mentioned he hadn't had a proper dessert in years. Through their conversations, Sophia learned that beneath Dawson's reserved exterior was a thoughtful man with unexpected depths. He'd been raised in Ohio, the son of a blacksmith, and had come west after the war with dreams of open spaces and freedom. He read Shakespeare and kept a journal of his thoughts and observations. And though he rarely spoke of it, he carried the scars of fighting for the Union, both visible on his body and hidden in his occasional distant gaze. For his part, Dawson discovered that Sophia's quiet demeanor concealed a sharp wit and passionate spirit. She shared her dreams of someday writing stories of her own, tales of strong women finding their place in the West. He brought her paper and ink as a gift, encouraging her to start putting her ideas to page. In town, their developing relationship became the new favorite topic of conversation. Some, like Mrs. Perkins, sniffed disapprovingly at how quickly Sophia had moved on from Thomas. Others thought it terribly romantic, especially after word spread about how Dawson had defended her honor at the church. "People will talk no matter what we do," Dawson told Sophia one evening as they sat on her porch. "Best to give them something worth talking about." And with that, he leaned over and kissed her gently on the lips, her first kiss, and all the sweeter for having waited for the right man. As summer ripened toward autumn, Sophia found herself falling deeply in love with Dawson. The pain of Thomas's rejection faded into something almost like gratitude. If he hadn't abandoned her, she might never have discovered what real love felt like. Then came the day that threatened to shatter their newfound happiness. Sophia was in town purchasing supplies when Thomas Whitaker sauntered into the general store. He had been conspicuously absent from Whispering Creek since the day of the failed wedding, supposedly visiting relatives in the next county. Now he approached her with the smug confidence of a man who believed himself irresistible. "Sophia," he greeted her with a familiar smile. "You're looking well," she regarded him coolly. "Mr. Whitaker, I'm surprised to see you back in town. Come now, surely we can dispense with such formality after all we've been to each other." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I've come to apologize for my behavior. It was unforgivable, yet here you are, seeking forgiveness anyway." Sophia turned back to selecting the fabric she needed. Thomas placed his hand on her arm. "I made a terrible mistake, Sophia, the woman I left you for. It wasn't what I thought it would be. I've realized that what we had was special." Sophia gently but firmly removed his hand. "What we had was a lie, Thomas. You never truly cared for me." "That's not true," he protested. "I've had time to think and I want to make things right. We could still have a life together." The store had gone silent as other customers pretended not to eavesdrop. Sophia was acutely aware of the attention, just as she had been in the church that day. "Even if I believed you were sincere, which I don't, it's too late." She straightened her shoulders. "I've found someone who values me for who I am, not what I can provide or how I might enhance his reputation." Thomas's expression darkened. "You mean Ryker? That solitary rancher who barely speaks to anyone. Do you really think he cares for you?" "I know he does," Sophia replied with quiet confidence. "He's just taking advantage of your vulnerability," Thomas sneered. "What could a man like that possibly see in—" "I'd be very careful about finishing that sentence," came Dawson's voice from the doorway. He stood with his hat in his hands, his expression dangerously calm as he entered the store. "Miss Calloway asked me to meet her here." "I didn't expect to find you, Whitaker." Thomas turned, his hand instinctively moving toward the pistol he wore at his hip, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by anyone in the store. "This is a private conversation, Ryker," Thomas said coldly. "Nothing's private in a public store," Dawson replied, moving to stand beside Sophia. "And from what I heard, the lady doesn't wish to continue your conversation. This doesn't concern you." "Sophia concerns me," Dawson said simply. "Her happiness, her well-being, those matter to me a great deal." Thomas laughed bitterly. "You've certainly moved quickly, haven't you, Sophia? I wonder what people think about that." "I don't particularly care what people think," she replied, finding strength in Dawson's steady presence. "But I do care about the truth, and the truth is, you never loved me. You courted me because you thought I'd be a convenient wife, quiet, grateful, and unlikely to object to your extracurricular activities." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "You ungrateful, that's quite enough," Dawson interrupted, his voice hard as steel. "You had your chance with this remarkable woman and you threw it away. I suggest you accept that and move on." For a moment, it seemed Thomas might escalate the confrontation. His hand hovered near his gun and a dangerous light gleamed in his eyes. But then he looked around at the store full of witnesses and thought better of it. "This isn't over," he muttered, stalking toward the door. He paused beside Dawson, speaking low enough that only he and Sophia could hear. "She's not worth the trouble, Ryker. You'll figure that out soon enough." After Thomas left, the store gradually returned to normal activity, though Sophia could feel curious eyes on her and Dawson. He helped her complete her shopping, carrying her purchases as they walked outside. "Are you all right?" he asked gently when they were alone. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her hands were shaking slightly. "I just never expected him to return, let alone to suggest we might reconcile." Dawson's jaw tightened. "The man has no shame, or perhaps he's realized what he lost and can't stand the thought that you might be happy without him." "I am happy," Sophia said, looking up at him. "Happier than I ever would have been with Thomas." The warmth in Dawson's eyes made her heart skip. "I'm glad to hear that, because I have something I've been wanting to ask you." But before he could continue, the sound of angry voices drew their attention to the saloon across the street. Thomas had apparently gone straight there after the confrontation in the store, and now he was staggering onto the boardwalk, visibly drunk despite the early hour. "Ryker," he shouted when he spotted them. "You think you're better than me, taking my leavings and pretending it's love." Dawson stepped slightly in front of Sophia. "Go home and sleep it off, Whitaker. You're making a spectacle of yourself. Don't tell me what to do." Thomas lurched forward, drawing his pistol with unsteady hands. You stole what was mine. People on the street scattered, ducking into doorways or behind wagons. Dawson remained calm, though Sophia could see the tension in his shoulders. Put the gun away, Dawson said evenly. Sophia isn't property to be stolen. She's a woman who deserves respect, something you clearly don't understand. I understand that she was mine until you turned her against me, Thomas slurred, waving the pistol dangerously. Always watching her, weren't you? Even when we were courting. I saw how you looked at her in town. Thomas, please, Sophia stepped out from behind Dawson. This is foolishness. No one has wronged you. Stay back, Sophia, Dawson warned, trying to shield her again. Listen to him, Thomas sneered, always the gentleman. Did he tell you why he really helped you that day at the church? Did he tell you he's wanted you for years but was too cowardly to speak up until I was out of the way? That's enough, Whitaker, Dawson said sharply. It's true, isn't it? Thomas jabbed the pistol in their direction. You waited until she was humiliated and vulnerable, then swooped in to play the hero. What kind of man does that? Sophia looked at Dawson, saw the conflict in his eyes. Is that true? She asked quietly. You wanted to court me before. Dawson didn't look away from Thomas and his wavering gun. Yes, but not the way he's making it sound. I never wished for your humiliation, Sophia. I would have given anything to spare you that pain. So noble, Thomas mocked. Let's see how noble you are with a bullet in your gut. Everything happened so quickly after that. Thomas raised his pistol higher, his finger tightening on the trigger. Dawson lunged forward just as the gun fired, tackling Thomas to the ground. The bullet went wide, shattering a window in the building behind them. They struggled in the dirt, Dawson trying to wrest the gun from Thomas's grip while avoiding being shot. Another shot discharged into the ground, and then Dawson managed to knock the weapon from Thomas's hand. He delivered a solid punch that left the younger man dazed and bleeding from a split lip. By then, Sheriff Miller had arrived, drawn by the gunshots. He quickly took control of the situation, hauling Thomas to his feet and handcuffing him. Attempted murder in broad daylight, the sheriff said grimly. You've really done it this time, Whitaker. He attacked me. Thomas protested, blood dripping from his mouth. That's not what half the town saw, Sheriff Miller replied, nodding to the witnesses who had emerged from their hiding places. Take him to the jail, he instructed his deputy, and send for the judge in Billings. This is a serious matter. As Thomas was led away, still hurling threats and accusations, Sophia rushed to Dawson's side. He had a cut above his eye and dirt on his clothes, but appeared otherwise unharmed. Are you all right? She asked anxiously, pulling out her handkerchief to dab at the blood on his face. I'm fine, he assured her, wincing slightly at her touch. Though this wasn't exactly how I planned to spend the afternoon. Sheriff Miller approached them. You'll both need to come by the office later to give statements, but there's no rush. Plenty of witnesses saw what happened. After the sheriff left, Dawson took Sophia's hand and led her away from the curious onlookers, finding a quiet spot beside the church where they could have some privacy. I'm sorry about all that, he said, his expression troubled. Thomas was right about one thing. I have wanted to court you for a long time. I should have told you the whole truth from the beginning. Why didn't you? Sophia asked, still holding her blood-stained handkerchief. Dawson sighed. At first, I was trying to protect your feelings. You'd been through enough without learning that I'd been harboring feelings for you while you were engaged to another man. Later. He shook his head. I suppose I was afraid you'd think less of me, that you'd believe Thomas's version of events. Do you really think so little of my judgment? Sophia asked softly. No, his eyes met hers. But I think so much of you that the thought of losing your good opinion terrified me. Sophia reached up to touch his face gently. Dawson, you defended me when no one else would. You've shown me nothing but respect and kindness. The timing of when your feelings developed is far less important to me than the quality of those feelings. Relief washed over his features. I had something I wanted to ask you before we were interrupted, he said, taking both her hands in his. I'm not sure this is the right moment anymore with everything that's happened, but I don't want to wait any longer. He dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hands. Sophia Calloway, these past months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and joy to days that were once merely about survival. I love your strength, your kindness, your quiet determination. I love the way you see beauty in this harsh land, and the way you've helped me see it too." Tears filled Sophia's eyes as she realized what was happening. "I know you've been hurt before, and I know it might seem too soon, but I promise to spend every day of my life ensuring you never regret giving me your heart." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small ring with a modest diamond. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" For a moment, Sophia thought about all she had endured: the loss of her parents, the struggle to maintain the homestead, the public humiliation at Thomas's hands. But then she looked at Dawson kneeling before her, his eyes full of sincere love and hope, and knew that all those hardships had led her to this moment, to this man. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "yes, I will marry you, Dawson Ryker." His face lit up with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet and pulled her into a tender kiss that promised a lifetime of love and respect. 3 weeks later, Sophia stood once again in the small church of Whispering Creek. This time, however, there was no mockery or whispers, only the happy faces of friends and neighbors who had come to witness her marriage to Dawson Ryker. Judge Harmon, who had traveled from Billings to preside over Thomas Whitaker's trial, had agreed to stay an extra day to perform the wedding ceremony. Thomas himself was awaiting transfer to the territorial prison, his attempted murder charge reduced to assault with a deadly weapon after Dawson had magnanimously declined to press the more serious charge. Sophia wore a new dress, one that Dawson had insisted on buying for her despite her protests that it was an extravagance. The pale blue silk made her eyes shine, and wildflowers adorned her upswept hair. As she walked down the aisle toward Dawson, who watched her with undisguised adoration, Sophia reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. What had begun as the most humiliating day of her life had set in motion events that led to finding the kind of love she had previously only read about in her books. When Judge Harmon pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson took her hand and, in front of all assembled, pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles, just as he had done that fateful day, a reminder of where their journey had begun. "I love you, Mrs. Ryker," he whispered for her ears alone as the church erupted in applause. "And I love you," she replied, standing on tiptoe to kiss him properly, no longer concerned with what anyone in Whispering Creek might think. Their wedding celebration lasted well into the evening, with the whole town turning out to share in their happiness. Even Mrs. Perkins, who had been among the most critical of Sophia after the first wedding disaster, approached to offer congratulations. "It seems everything worked out for the best after all," the older woman said with a grudging smile. "Mr. Ryker is a fine man." "Yes, he is," Sophia agreed, watching as Dawson chatted with the blacksmith across the room. "Sometimes what seems like the worst moment of your life can lead you to the best." That night, as they drove toward Dawson's ranch, now their ranch, Sophia leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in a way she had never thought possible. "What are you thinking?" Dawson asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "I'm thinking about the story I've started writing," she replied, "about a woman who finds unexpected love after heartbreak." "Sounds familiar," he chuckled. "Will it have a happy ending?" Sophia looked up at the stars scattered like diamonds across the Montana night sky, then at the man beside her who had changed her life with a simple, gallant gesture. "The happiest," she promised, knowing that their real story was only just beginning.